this last session is Dr. Pooja Paswan. Dr. Paswan is the Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. We welcome you, ma'am.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible. We welcome you to the training program, ma'am, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Impact and Policy Research Institute, the conveners, the moderator, director, and dear colleagues. I will now share my screen. So please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak about the process of designing a socio-environmental policy in a country like India. For the past 3 days, we've been deliberating and discussing matters regarding the dangerous effect or the hazardous effect of heat wave and various other climatic calamities. And when it comes to disaster management, how well prepared are we? Where are the lacunae lie? And in terms of designing policy, are we looking at places where we should be looking, or are we overlooking something which needs to be in a line of sight? So, yeah, when we look at the current scenario, this is just a brief scenario which I'll just take you through. So there have been a series of heat waves since this particular program is regarding the heat wave and its effect and consequences. So there have been a string of heat waves and episodes of heat wave around the world over the past few years, and the intensity of the said heat wave and such calamity has increased over the period of time. If any one of you is familiar, especially students from geography background, you must be familiar with various ice ages which have been prevalent since the inception of Earth, or Earth as we know it. So there have been several ice ages, and according to one theory, we happen to find ourselves in the middle of one where the ice is receding, which means the planet is getting warmer, and it will continue to get warmer. So it has nothing to do with the placement of Earth, but rather these ice ages, they do come in over the period of time. And according to several theories, the extinction of certain species was because of the advancing or the retreating ice ages, for that matter. When we are looking at our planet, like I said, it's getting warmer with the passage of time. And why is this happening? Then again, if you look at, I'm sorry, I don't have any diagrams. I just thought I'll just go through the theory aspect of policy making. But if you just imagine or look at the diagram, the climatological diagram of Earth, so we do find that the air and the traveling of energy happens from a high pressure to a low pressure. It happens from tropical, it moves from the tropical region to the temperate to the polar region, and that's what constitutes the movement of atmosphere. And the movement of atmosphere also influences your ocean currents, for that matter, right? When we put all of that into perspective as to why is the particular heat wave or these heat intensity impact zones taking place, we tend to see that there is a huge similarity between certain conditions. One would be the movement of jet stream. If the difference between the high and the low pressure is extreme, then there's a possibility that the air in that particular area will move with a greater intensity from a high pressure area to low pressure area. So this is basically the core mechanics of how a tropical cyclone moves. Now, when we look at the movement of jet streams over the period of time, we tend to see that the difference between a high pressure area and a low pressure area, temperature difference, is not as diverse or as wide as we want it to be, and hence there is a slow movement of the jet streams. Why does this matter to us? Like I said, the average global temperature is on the rise, which means to any layman, the ice caps will melt, the islands will be submerged. The areas which experience uh, drought and flash floods, these incidences will increase. We are also witnessing a slow desertification of semi-arid regions, for that matter. And along with this, we have a very funny way of looking at a development policy. Now, when we think about development, the first thing that comes into mind is well-planned cities and concrete jungles and access to infrastructure and amenities. But however, our policymakers have confused development with urbanization, and here we need to draw a clear distinction as to when we talk about development, what are we basically looking at? Are we trying to convert villages into cities? Is that what development is for us? That every village should now have a mall, every village should now have more concretization in terms of usage of in terms of construction of houses or infrastructure. Should they all become heat source or heat islands? We need to understand this as well. One example, a very practical example I'll give you is every year during Diwali, when Delhi is choking with smog and a heavily polluted air, anybody who's outside of Delhi, living in a village with a cleaner air, in hilly regions, anywhere where you have access to a cleaner air, you should consider yourself developed. So in the modern sense, development is access to good resources, not just access to resources, but access to resources that will increase the longevity or increase the quality of life, enhance the quality of life. Not that we have these infrastructural development, but on a personal front, we are collapsing because of the stress generated by the so-called development infrastructure. You have concrete islands, you have concrete jungles, but there's immense air pollution that when you walk in certain cities, you should be wearing an oxygen mask. There are cities where ecology and development is balanced, and how those governments have been able to achieve that particular balance is what we'll be looking at. Because when we look at the environmental policies in India, we always forget we are a developing nation, not a developed nation. Another thing, we have a high population density, and 70% of that population resides in semi-urban or rural areas. So, owing to which, the idea of development will vary, across different regions, and of course across different economic uh, factors. So the idea of development for a farmer with absolutely no or less access to water or less access to irrigation will be 24-hour water supply, or a more convenient way of uh, being involved in agriculture, access to funds, access to money, access to easy loans, etc., etc. So we need to understand that when we talk about development, we we don't have to necessarily exclude the ecological balance which exists or which comes along with the whole concept of development then again, right? Um, and putting that into perspective, when I do remember, we often talk about sparrows leaving Delhi. Delhi is a metro city, it's a mega city, and then we tend to justify that, all right, it's a metro, it's polluted, there is over urbanization, and hence certain species of birds, including butterflies for that matter, and several other species of flora and fauna tend to leave their natural habitat and migrate elsewhere. But if you go to New York, you will find New York is a mega city, but you will find sparrows there. They have been able to maintain that particular green cover, and not just maintaining a green cover, for namesake, but maintaining a green cover, which means there is a pond, there is a water body, there is enough flora and fauna, there is enough interaction between man and nature, so that the ecological balance is not disturbed. So you might have, like in Delhi, there is a nursery culture and there's a parks culture, but not many of us are aware that before the construction of Barakhamba Metro, the whole area of Barakhamba right up to the Copernicus Marg was covered in trees. So we got rid of that huge green cover in order to make way for a more convenient mode of transportation and a better connectivity in the name of development, right? And of course, Delhi Metro happened 20 years back. It's 15 years back rather, but then it's been a long journey. And at that particular point of time, India's priority was a better connectivity, etc., etc. But when we see that we are paying a huge price of that so-called priority, prioritizing health before development, development before health, prioritizing, development before a better standard of living, we tend to have a very skewed idea of how a policy should be shaped. And for that, I will take you through in the next slide. So when we look at, we often talk about sustainable development, and understand this, that as your planet heats, there will be several social impact, political impact, ecological impact, economic impact, of that particular implication. So with a warmer planet, we tend to find that A, yes, there will be health implication. B, in terms of nutritional requirement, we all know that, as in locally, that in case if you get a heat stroke, this is the local remedy that you should be doing. This is the recovery period. If allopathy is not available to you, then you should wrap the person in a wet blanket or something of that sort, or make sure they are well hydrated, and not just hydrated, using water, but a mineral water, or bel ka sharbat, or coconut water for that matter, which has ions, so that salt will be replenished. Now, as we move to a more warmer earth, these so-called ancient knowledge, or these nuskas, have to be a part of our daily narrative as well. We cannot keep relying on the old knowledge base of this. 10 years back, the weather used to be like this. I mean, I remember when I was in school, after the Diwali break, which is, in October, our winter uniform was out. We were asked to wear blazers and ties and everything. And currently, the winter uniform in Delhi does not come out before December. It's still warmer, and no matter how much you want to blame global warming, of course, yes, industrialization and global warming, all of that, but there is no moving away from the fact that this is also a way, a natural process. Like I said, in the different phases of ice age, the planet is supposed to get warmer, and this is then again which a process which happens after several hundred years, and unfortunately we find ourselves during the warmer phase. When we look at the social impact, when we further explore the social impact, there are certain sections which of society who witness a higher mortality. They witness, they are more vulnerable based on the fact that they're economically weaker. They happen to be immigrants in the current city. If they were back in their village, living with their families, they will have somebody to take care of them. So high mortality is often seen in areas where the economic inequality is higher, or the access to infrastructure, health, funding is relatively less, or access to emotional support, community support is relatively less. So having said that, the social impact makes a huge difference, and it will adversely affect people coming from a vulnerable section of the society. When we look at the social impact, the heat-related social impacts are not evenly distributed across population. Richer people have access to infrastructure, they have access to funding, they have access to cool environment, they have access to uh, alternatives, with nutritional alternatives. So if a certain um, nutritional supplement is unavailable in their diet, they would supplement it with by taking artificial supplements or any way how. However, people coming from economically weaker section tend to rely on natural substitutes. So you will often find that uh, uh, the uh, people who are involved in physical labor, they tend to have a certain kind of a diet which is rich in protein, and it is also advisable that they should have a diet which is rich in protein and fiber, and of course other food groups. But people with a certain sedentary lifestyle need to have a different kind of diet which will suit their lifestyles. Now, this particular knowledge is predominantly with people who are slightly more well off, who have uh, access to the resources to provide and nourish themselves in a certain way. But when we look at migrant population, we look at these informal settlements, the slum areas, we will often find that they are at a far more risk as opposed to people who have shielded or protected themselves economically, because there is a lack of poor infrastructure. Also, the fact that they are at a disadvantageous location, you know, away from their community, they they lack the knowledge of where to go for a healthcare or where to seek healthcare, etc., etc. Another aspect, when we look at the social aspect of um, the heat wave, the social aspect is directly linked with the economic aspect. So, as your planet gets warmer, the open air or the uh, the jobs or the labor work which is available, in open areas will be diminished. So you must have seen that during the heat wave, the construction, the labor gets expensive. During certain seasons, the labor gets expensive. During COVID, the cost of labor increased. And then again, so uh, job opportunities such as construction, creation of constructing a building, creating infrastructure, all of this is bound to be more expensive in the near future. The labor will be expensive. The cost of creating infrastructure will be expensive. And globally, there will be a decrease in, this is again a projection made by UNEP, but there will be a decrease of 2% of the working hour every year, because either it's too hot to work, or the labor population or your human resource does not like the condition, the working condition, and hence you have to alter the condition, you have to provide safe working environments, etc., etc., and all of that will require money. When we look at the agricultural sector in India, large percentage of people earn their livelihood through agriculture, but India has a problem of land ownership, meaning that you do have small and marginal farmers, and farmers with medium land holding or smaller land holding. So as your planet gets hotter, the uh, kind of investment which a farmer will now be putting in the agriculture will differ. More irrigation required. The kind of crops that they go for will differ. Crops which can survive a hot temperature, or the cropping pattern will be different. Will have to be adjusted. All of this is economically intensive area. We might try to convince ourselves that agriculture is the most sustainable form of economic activity, but we'll be kidding or lying to ourselves, because agriculture, although supports a large percentage of population, but having said that, it still relies on the rudimentary form of agriculture. A farmer is less likely to make a huge investment if he or she does not own a huge chunk of land, and agriculture, even today, is the safe haven or a plan B of a lot of migrant workers, So having said that, as as your planet continues to get warmer and warmer, the cropping patterns will be changed, will be readjusted. How you raise your livestock will have to be readjusted, and so on and so forth. Now, India is also seeing that there are changes in the weather pattern, and it's directly impacting, like I said, it's directly impacting your agriculture. These are just a few statistics. But having said that, there is now a growing energy demand for cooling. So this year, we saw that the Indian government decided to revive the coal mines, and there was a shortage and more frequent power cuts, particularly in the cities during this particular summer. We're also seeing that there is a huge heat wave, intensified heat wave in parts of Britain and in parts of Wales. Having said that, all of this increases the demand for cooling. All of this increases and puts additional pressure on your work, on your businesses, and new infrastructure has to be created in order to support the existing demand, right? And with these, why creating of new infrastructure, replacing existing infrastructure adds to your carbon footprint, adds to generation, of more process that will generate greenhouse gases, for that matter. When we look at ecological impact, like I said, if you are convinced by the fact that this is a mega city and yes, certain species will leave you, and it's only too natural, then you need to stop and look at certain successful mega cities or more developed cities in the West where they have balanced ecology and development. And then again, we need to do that too. So, I remember when I was in graduation, and my college had this a water harvesting technique. They had this whole tank and everything installed. And our principal, any guest or dignitary who used to come to visit my college, would be given a tour of the water harvesting plant that was placed in the college. And there's an underground tank, and there's a rainwater harvesting, etc., etc. And my college made a big deal out of it. Having said that, when we look at rain harvesting technique, there is so much of enhancement in the technology which was placed during 2005 in a college. And now when we look at rain harvesting technique, when we look at tapping of solar power, when we look at generating electricity through the use of wind energy, there is so much of technological development that has taken place. But how much of that development has been implemented or percolated from developed countries to the developing or underdeveloped countries? Because that enhanced technology is costly. And the more latest the technology, the costlier it is. And of course, developed countries tend to invest heavily in research and the marketability of a more cleaner and a greener technology. Developing countries are usually the consumers of such advanced technology, and with which there is a power balance which is always oriented towards developed countries. They will develop, they will come up with a new technology, something more greener, which reduces your carbon footprint. You can trade that security in the international market, etc., etc. But like I said, you will always be looking west for a better technology, and a more cleaner air, etc., and all of that. So ecological, like I said, coming back to this, the ecological impact has to balance the development, and that can only be done if we invest economically and politically in the policy making process. How we'll do that, I'll just quickly take you through. These are again statistics. Sorry. Right, I've been through this. Yeah. So in the public policy sphere, we often talk about two aspects. One is value fact dichotomy and identifying counterfactual. What is value fact dichotomy? Very simple way. Value is something you attach to a fact. For example, the color of this particular fabric is dark blue. Now, this is a fact. Why? Because it's absorbing every other color and it is reflecting this particular color. We all know this particular color is called dark blue or navy blue, whatever. But the value which I might attach to this particular fact will differ from culture to culture. So maybe to a culture, I belong to a certain culture which might think that this particular color, navy blue, is auspicious. So hence I'm wearing it. Maybe a certain ideology associates something else with this particular color, and hence I'm wearing it to show my solidarity towards a particular movement or things like that. Now, in public policy or policy making, we need to separate the value from the fact. So when we are looking at a semi-arid region, or when we are looking at a hilly region, and we tend to associate certain culture or cropping patterns or food habits with that particular region, know this, that as your weather changes, as the climate changes, and it has started to change, it's been changing for a while now, your attachment to certain food items or attachment to certain colors or attachment to certain certain weather phenomenon might have to be dealt away with. So like we tend to hear a lot of these aspects that now farmers are moving from non-traditional crops to cash crops. So you will find a strawberry farm in the hills. You will find, instead of the traditional rhododendron, you tend to find more berries which are not indigenous to India, right? But their economic value is higher, and the fact that they're very exotic, and they look really nice on your dining table, that particular demand has pushed the farmers to invest in non-indigenous crops, but know this, I'm not advocating that, we should go back to indigenous crops or something, but as the weather changes, the weather is also supporting such farming. And we have to be prepared for a time when the weather will force farmers to orient their crops according to the climate, the climate changes that now we are seeing. So there used to be a particular brand of rice, and it had these small grains. We used to call it tuta chawal or something of that. So if you go to a grocery store, and it was made during festivals, and this was used when we used to make kheer or something of that sort. Now kheer is made with basmati rice, not the tutawa chawal. What I'm trying to tell you is that that broken rice was indigenous to certain areas. So when the first harvest used to take place, the rice was used from the first harvest to cook something and offer it to the local devtas. Now it's more exotic to cook your kheer in basmati rice. Basmati has a very high fragrance, but when it comes to sweetness or a high starch content, it lacks both of them. Whereas if you go to a village and if you have the indigenous rice which is grown, it will be slightly fat, thoda mota hota hai, but it will not be sleek and very pulao like basmati chawal, but the taste will be very different. The nutritional value is very different. Know this for a fact that while designing a sound policy, the policymakers have to remove the value from the fact in order to see the situation objectively. A particular area, like the Kosi River, is notorious for changing its course every year during floods. Now, what people of this particular village have done, they have constructed the houses on the first floor, and the ground floor is basically, they have made passages for the river water to pass. So, hence, the life is not disturbed, it's left undisturbed even during floods. People tend to orient. Policymakers have to do that as well, right? Then another aspect is identifying counterfactual. Now, this is a great way of introducing a new policy. Supposing Delhi, when we couple of years back, Arvind Kejriwal's government introduced an odd even scheme to reduce the air pollution and things like that. But the odd even scheme had, a certain criteria. And I remember talking about the odd even scheme at a conference in Denver, where people were actually amazed. Like if you're a woman and you're driving, then odd even does not apply to you if you're a lone driver. And I had a great time during those period, because there were no men on the road. I mean, very few men on the road. Also, the Delhi roads were literally empty, and less checking and things like that. But having said that, that particular experiment, how successful or how unsuccessful it was, there are of course mixed data. Having said that, when a government or when any policymaker decides to introduce a particular policy or a program, then there are several factors which go into identifying the said counterfactuals. A, is clean air important to you? Or you're okay with buying diffusers, and you're okay with wearing a mask, or you're okay with wearing an oxygen mask, you're okay with bad lungs, because if you're okay with all of that, the government will not make an effort to provide you with clean air. But if clean air, sustainable livelihood is very, very important to you, green technology is very important to you, vegan lifestyle is very important to you, then the government will do something about it. So identifying counterfactual is that I need to lower the air pollution. If I introduce odd even scheme, this would cut down the carbon emission by this much. If I remove all the men from the road, again kidding, so the carbon emission will be cut down this much. If we focus on planting more trees will take at least 5 years to grow, but I need to have an array of staff to look after those trees and make sure that they, they're not plugged, or they're not damaged, and they survive, so that the green cover can increase by this much percentage, and the carbon footprint will reduce, etc., etc. But all these are counterfactuals, helping me make a plan A, plan B, plan C, so that I can anticipate in advance or make an intelligent guess as to which of the plans will work. One second. There's also a process called a strategic triangle in policy design. Like I said, before any policy is implemented or even conceived, the idea is even conceived, there's often a strategic triangle test done for that particular policy. Is it technically correct? Or even was technically implementable? Announce that if this is your registration number, you bring out your car. If you're a woman driving by yourself, welcome, and things like that. And during these school hours, carpooling is allowed, etc., etc. This is technically correct. You can do all of that. Then again, political supportability. Like I said, if clean air is important to you, if organic farming is important to you, if use of organic fertilizers is important to you, if discontinuation of BT seeds is important to you, then your political machinery will get behind it. Your representatives will get behind it. But if it is not important to you, like organic farming is less important to you as opposed to access to education. You want education first. Organic farming can wait. So your political power will get behind providing you with sustainable education, free or compulsory education, etc., etc. But if uh, longevity is important to you, good life expectancy is important to you, if uh, ecological balance is important to you, then you will find political supportability to complement those demands. Again, right? And then, of course, organizationally implementable. Is it cost effective? So whether it's a social policy, environmental policy, they all go through cost benefit analysis. They all go through deciding on the counterfactual. If we do this, can we reach this particular milestone? If we open primary healthcare center, will it reduce child mortality rate? Will it reduce maternal mortality rate? Should we start, a dedicated nutrition program for adolescent girls to curb maternal mortality rate? So even this is, of course, I'm giving the example of health policies, but in terms of environmental policies, because when we see the history of environmental policy in India, we are hugely lacking. And that's because environment has not taken a priority for us yet. With 1.3 billion population, we're still struggling to stay afloat economically. We are still struggling to provide a decent lifestyle for the most vulnerable section of the society. After COVID, certain policies which were built over a decade, 2 decades, over 30, 40 years have taken a huge hit. We are still looking to compensate all of that. So currently ask yourself, as a person, as professors, as directors, as students, is environment important to you over access to infrastructure, access to health, access to education, access to jobs? Is it important to you? Because if the answer is no, or it can wait, all these three factors of the strategic triangle will show you whether environment is a priority for you or it can wait. Right? Then there's a policy design theory, which is called a theory of change. I want relief from heat wave. All right, what will be my first intervention? Maybe as a government, I issue that no outside work during the period of June and July in this particular area in North India. Can I do that? The output will be less available, more costly labor, less, a decrease in mortality rate, less burden on hospitals uh, in dealing with cases of heat waves, etc., etc. The outcome would be, again, less mortality rate, and impact would be that people would slowly, over the period of time, adapt to these interventions. An intervention, if it is sudden, the government has to be very far-sighted in anticipating the output and outcome before you begin to see the impact of a policy. So when the government announced that we will provide free education, the output would be literacy rate will increase. But what is the outcome? People will still hesitate whether we should send our kids to school, or not. It's only after midday meal scheme, the incentive of getting a hot nutritional meal led parents, compelled parents to send their kids to school, and the impact was a high literacy rate or less school dropout. Take that particular theory and let's put it in an environmental policy design. So again, during these many months, 2 months, Delhi is absolutely unbearable. The cases of heat wave, heat strokes are very high. What do? From community perspective, you can have those pyau and provision where people can have access to water. Give free packets of ORF and salt solution, saline solution. Make the knowledge as to how to protect yourself during the heat wave as accessible as possible through jingles, through social media, etc., posters, all of that. Only then you can begin to see the impact, not in this particular month or this particular year, but over the period of time. These things happen gradually, because a culture has to be established over the period of time. Bombay did not start lining or queuing at a bus stop overnight. Something must have initiated that culture. and that culture is pretty much lacking in Delhi. Again, I'm digressing. When we look at the disaster management aspect, again, there is one paper on disaster management which I teach in Jamia. So we tend to explore that. What do you mean by a disaster and what do you mean by a hazard? So uh, heat wave again is a natural phenomenon, but if it claims the loss of life and property, then it becomes a disaster. Now, understand this, that during certain months in India, where certain areas tend to witness a huge rise in temperature, and also these are the areas which are densely populated with less green cover. During these during these months, such areas can be identified based on their vulnerability. Certain sections of people can be identified based on their vulnerability. How economically, what do you call, how economically uh, comfortable they are, or would they require certain assistance, etc., etc. Right? When a disaster occurs, when a hazard meets a vulnerability. So we know for a fact that certain months in India are the period in which temperature uh, rises, shoots up uh, very fast in a very small amount of time. However, know this, that by acquainting ourselves to the hazard and making sure that we have identified the vulnerability areas, we will be able to do a better risk management. One example that comes to mind is the example of Odisha, where they have dealt with the recurring tropical cyclone in such a way that it, it's a global case study. It's a very successful case study. Understand this, we need to do something of that sort, making sure that people are taken care of, pulling community cooperation, during these particular months, making sure that community comes together, making sure people are well aware, as what to do and what not to do. Not only that, making sure that people from all age groups know exactly what to do. So your child in a school bus, a kid in a school bus should know that if a friend feels a little woozy, or is showing a certain symptoms, the teacher needs to be alerted, or offer water or something of that sort. So how do kids, or how does your society respond to a disaster? We should know this. During monsoon months or during certain months, we often find that orange alert has been issued, or the some warning has been issued. We tend to disregard these kind of warnings, orange alert or yellow alert or whatever. We tend to disregard. But what exactly needs to be done when such warnings are issued? That particular aspect, that particular knowledge is required. And not just that, we should be keeping the knowledge and not doing anything with it, but making sure it is implementable. Regular drills, repeated voicing or repeated echoing uh, of guidelines, etc., that needs to be done. A heat wave is again another disaster management, another disaster hazard, which can turn into a disaster if we are not prepared. So in the disaster management, we can start with prevention. We know that these 2 months are crucial and the weather will change, hence avoid less mobility. From the government side, how do we design certain policies? We can alter the working hours. Like in the West, when the clock is altered during summer solstice and winter solstice, so hence you can alter the working hours. Make certain policies by mitigation, by being prepared. If we have mastered prevention, mitigation, and preparedness, then our effort after the disaster, or the recovery time, will be less after the disaster. But if we are unprepared in these aspects of prevention, mitigation, and preparedness, which is, of course, a pre-disaster exercise, then we often find ourselves vulnerable when the disaster hits, and a huge amount of work needs to be done in the post-disaster management phases as well. So like I said, a better disaster preparedness in terms of heat wave, having the knowledge and the understanding that this is what's happening to the planet. And this is not going to be easy. There will be months where temperature will exceed 50. We need to be prepared as a government, as society, as community as well. What to do when the disaster impacts? At the time of the impact, when you find yourself in Delhi in the month of June, or July was also no cakewalk, but then it rained. But having said that, during the time of impact, how well prepared are you? Are you keeping a tab on your hydration? Are you keeping a tab on your health? Are you keeping, are you sharing knowledge or pieces of information which is provided to you by the government among your loved ones, etc., etc.? Is your institution, the place where you work, equipped better or preparing well in case somebody collapses due to heat stroke? Do you have packets of ORF, and do you have uh, enough hydration to revive the person, etc., etc.? So your responses, how well prepared you are during disaster preparedness, impact, and response will make sure that the recovery and mitigation take less of a time, right? We often tend to see, what are the policy gaps when we're designing any policy, social policy, health policy, environmental policy. The weak performance owing to the principal and agent problem. The speaker before me mentioned that we should keep agents, people at the center of any policy design or any policy implementation. This is absolutely true. You know, Again, giving the example of Delhi, a migrant laborer coming to Delhi comes with the idea of earning money. So preserving his health, or uh, preserving or securing a sustainable livelihood or a better standard of living is secondary to acquiring or earning more money. Hence, we tend to find more casualty or cases where laborers tend to fall sick, etc., etc. Right? So know this, that you might have, the government might issue a guideline that no working hours, or no work during these particular two weeks of a heat wave, but the weakest of the weaker section tends to suffer consequences of these kind of policy decisions. Like when the government issued the diktat that there will be a lockdown, an immediate lockdown. The sufferers were the lowest rung of the people, the lowest rung of the society. So again, one needs to see that there has to be a proper alignment between the principal and agent, in order to avoid the uh, the misaligned alignment of policies and goals, or of policy impact and output. Again, when we look at the causes, or when we look at environmental policy, see, in terms of infrastructural policy, social policy, health policy, we can make the goal, or we can make the impact or output very tangible. Because in health policy, you can always say that we want maternal mortality rate reduced by half. We want child mortality rate reduced by half after 30 years. In education policy, you can always say we want literacy rate up by 30%. But in environmental policy, you can never say that I want air quality up by this much by this, these many years, unless you do the work. Plant more trees, green technology. Environmental policy require a different approach. They require a community-based approach. Your government might have the most amazing policy on how to curb air pollution, but if people are unwilling to follow, they still are unwilling to use a cleaner technology, or clean gas, and are unwilling to use electrical cars, then these policies will fall flat. So know this, that in terms of environmental policies, a huge amount of patience and community cooperation is absolutely necessary. Again, correlation is not causation. So if your government tends to believe planting 50 trees or having a tree planting drive will make sure that cleaner air, no. If your government tends to believe that, all right, we issue an order that you drive on this day and you drive on that day, odd and even scheme, and that will take care of the cleaner air or reducing the temperature, that's not going to work. So make sure that correlations that you're making, is not confused with the fact that that correlation is the cause, which will make sure my policy is success. You know, in education policy, you can make those kind of correlation. We will open more schools, we will hire more teachers, students enrollment rate will go up, and hence literacy rate will take care of itself. But in environmental policy, you cannot make that correlation and causation mistake. Right? Of course, inadequate regulation, corruption, self-explanatory. What are the gaps in policy implementation? Again, coordination failure, you know, and again, uh, when we talk about coordination failure, I'm not talking about the miscommunication between people and political representatives, but also coordination failure among different departments, different ministries, different sub-departments within a particular ministry, and so on and so forth. You know, and also, uh, did we make any mistake while establishing or assessing a counterfactual, or did we make any mistake, or did we leave any room for reassessment, or are we completely committed to the blueprint? You know, one aspect that comes to my mind of a not so fortunate policy decision is in India, if you've seen the BRT corridor. Now, the BRT corridor was constructed because, that time Sheila Dikshit government thought that, once we construct a dedicated bus rapid uh, transit corridor, people will be more inclined to use public transport and things like that. But that did not work very well. Public transport do not provide the same level of comfort. If you were, let's say, if you were to take a bus, and there is a possibility that you may not be riding in an AC bus in case you need to change buses throughout the length and breadth of your journey. You might switch. There could be a possibility that it's heavily jam packed. It's not a very good experience. But the same scenario, you'll be more willing to travel by metro. Metro is also equally jam packed. People are standing very close, to each other. But there is AC, and you're comfortable. It's underground or above the ground, but you're comfortable. So know this for a fact that if the buses were if the public transport other than the metro was made equally comfortable, people would be willing to communicate using public transport system. In mega cities, yes. In New York, very few people use the car or the town car, But other than that, subway happens to be a very popular and a convenient mode of transportation. Same goes for Mumbai, you know. So then again, there are certain gaps in policy implementation that we need to review and we need to ask, and particularly when it comes to environmental policy, because maybe one particular decision may not immediately lead to transformation or betterment in your ecological system, but it might be an initial or a very important start for you to get there, right? Possibility of elite capture. Now, understand this. This is the month of October. Diwali has just gone by. You are in Delhi. You cannot see anything. It's smoggy. You can't breathe. But your friend who decided to visit his grandparents in his village is very happy, posting selfies on Instagram, clean air, can see the sun, can see the moon, stars, and everything. While you're in Delhi, you can't even see your neighbor outside your balcony because it's so smoggy. Now, who is the elite in this particular section? Your friend who decided to leave Delhi because he had family in the village, he can enjoy himself and he has access to a better health condition, much, much better health condition than you are, So many times there is, with any development policy or any new policy, in the initial phases, every policy goes through something called an elite capture. In the sense, when odd even scheme came, families which had two cars, or they decided to buy another car, they took, and they had two different registration number. One was odd and one was even, right? So this is an example of an elite capture. They were able to ride the cars, they were able to use their own transport, they did not rely on public transport, and they were able to circumvent around the system, right? So every policy goes through a phase of elite capture, but make sure that after that particular phase of elite capture, the benefits get percolated down to the masses as well. Otherwise, we will find that there will be continued and increasing gaps between policy implementation and what was promised to you. The first speaker of this session, she talked about the economic investment in cleaner and a greener technology. But understand this, if private sector decides to invest heavily in a cleaner and a greener technology, they will thus market the technology in a similar way because private sector is here to do business. So that brings us to a very essential or a very crucial question: should government do business? So understand, the government needs to understand and define what public good is and what other externalities are. Like education, public health, these are public goods. Is environment a public good? Has your government identified that environment will be a public good? Because if your government says environment, clean environment is public good, is a part of public good, then the government will take active measures to make sure you have access to clean environment. If your government passes that clean air is your basic fundamental right, like free education, or it's a basic right, then state governments, local governments, central government will actively go in and make an effort in providing you with clean air and clean atmosphere. So understand this, that how do you define, like in management, it's always tricky, and it's a very smart way to put your need as somebody else's necessity. So if I'm, let's say, I'm into advertising, I have to make sure that, and I'm selling this particular pen, so I have to make sure that I project this pen in a certain way that your life is incomplete without this pen. Similarly, does your government think that your life is incomplete without cleaner air or a cooler environment? Because if it does, then you will see those kind of policy, those kind of decisions being transformed into sound policies, right? And then, the SDG, the MDG, everybody has discussed about making sure the environment and ecology and eco-environment very sustainable. But understand, sustainability will come with a cost. We are a developing nation. Look what happened to Sri Lanka in the name of sustainability. They went for organic farming and they paid a heavy price. Understand this. India wants development, but India wants economic development before ecological development. But do you have the time? West could afford economic development over ecological development, and now they are focusing on ecological and environmental development. But do you have that kind of time? As a nation, we need to ask ourselves, kya hamare paas itna waqt hai? So this particular heat wave, this year, what we experienced and what other nations are experiencing, we need to understand, and we need to be aware of the fact that this is an onset of something new. This particular think tank has been very forward in establishing and organizing a dedicated heat wave training program, because we've, in terms of disaster which afflict, natural disaster which afflict the subcontinent of India, we know about cyclones, we know about floods. Heat wave is new and it is here to stay. Why? Because your planet is warming. So environmental policy mimicking and addressing these crucial aspects and this particular hazard. Currently, it's a hazard, but it has a very high potential of turning into a disaster, and this is where we need effective policies to stop and take care of the environment and our people. So with this, I will stop, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Paswan, for this very interesting presentation. Now I would request Tikendra ji, if you want to add some words to ma'am's presentation.
How many Q&As do we have, Dr. Salvi?
So we have around 3 to 4 questions, 3 to 4
Okay.
relevant questions.
So I just want to make some general observations. So thank you, Dr. Pooja, for accepting this offer and making this. Probably this is our last presentation, isn't it, Dr. Salvi?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much. When you were speaking about the ice age and the warming period, there's a very interesting book written by Tony Joseph, Who We Are. And there, one of the arguments that is being pushed by some of the scientists is that we as human beings, I mean, we all know what climate science is, and we have those IPCC reports which are screaming at us, but they say we are like too small to really, affect Mother Nature. Somehow I draw some of the observations from it, but that doesn't mean, even if that is true, but that doesn't mean that we have the right to jeopardize and to ruin the way we are ruining the present before us, and of course the future. Having said that, I think there's another very interesting point that you've raised, and that is about what should be the priority? Should the priority be economic development, or should the priority be increasing the ecological footprint? I think there is dialectics in that. It's not that we can't do both. The point is, I mean, what many of the speakers have pointed out, that how do you do that? What is the approach? What are the processes? And as you have also pointed out, the processes must include going back to the people, just engaging them with all these, after all, they are part and parcel of the policy paradigm as well, because it is they who must be linked to that. And there is very interesting work by Jan Makak, who wrote almost 60 years ago, called Planning with Nature. The point is, are we doing that? And the philosophers who pointed out that it's not restoration, it has to be restitution. And they have also gone into the details of pointing out that, look, it's basically the drive of industrial capitalism to what they point out to be the fourth stage of capitalist revolution. I mean, the age of artificial intelligence, or Internet of Things and whatnot. But they want mobility of the people, and it is actually that key which leads to this large kind of displacement that is also taking place. So I think not just to restrict to some of the core elements of climate science, but to move beyond that. I think what is important is that if we just talk about the dialectics, then that is something that we can actually work out with some of the sustainable solutions. For example, this is what we are doing in Leh, where instead of the RCC, there's inverse. There's no heat wave. There's the cold waves. We get chill blains there. So with, of course, earthen material, and I don't know, because one of our previous speakers, Dr. was saying about ancient. How ancient do we go? Because ancient means also Harappan civilization. In fact, I'm writing a longish essay on that, right from the Harappas to the modern smart cities. So I think let's not just brush that aside. My point is that either this or that, but let's try to bring in a kind of dialectics that we can have economic development, and this leads to whether we should focus on mitigation or on adaptive strategies, because this is what we've been screaming right from our common but differential responsibility that we've been asking and you spoke a lot about technological transfer. $100 billion were committed by the global north. I was there in Paris during climate change talks, but we know not even 20% have been passed. So that also is a reality. But also, I mean, do we just focus on adaptive strategies and not on our own mitigation strategies? Also, I think it requires more debate, more discussion, but not to lose the point. So with that, I think we can just move to Q&As. But it's been a fascinating presentation also, because you brought to light some of the very practical experiences. And just to share one very funny anecdote, Pooja, with you. And that pertains to when you were pointing out at the PRT corridor in Delhi. Okay? So there was this conference organized by the DOSH and the London School of Economics. I was also a speaker. In fact, Professor Banerjee, who got the Nobel Prize recently, he and I were in the same panel. So we were discussing about urban futures and whatnot. And I remember there was another panel which comprised the former Chief Minister of Delhi, Sheila Dixit, who had just lost at the time, and of course the Mayor of Bogota. And the Mayor of Bogota said, "Look, what a fascinating thing that you did. you brought in the BRT and you know, Bogota has experimented lots of these things. Then why did you actually move back? Why did you not continue? She said there was lots of pressure. I mean, something that you were actually pointing out, you know, the elite and that stuff. And then, but he was a clever man and he'd done all his homework very well. And he said, look, I have the statistics and the figure. Do you know how many people at that time, he said, own cars in Delhi? So the pressure came from the car owners, actually, the middle class and the upper middle classes, and not more than 15 or 16%, which means 84% of the people is not people for the policy framers, you know. But these 16% who are very vocal, very vociferous in raising their voices, are actually dominating the policy paradigm. And we see still, I mean, even with this government, I mean, which experiment, they also know because they lose a lot. So having said that, I think it's something very important. I mean, how do you break this? I mean, you know, how do you bring this major disruption? And we've seen, I mean, after that, we've been seeing flyovers and whatnot. These are not sustainable ways. So therefore, that's what I say. I mean, there can be a balance. But the point is, how are we engaging the people? You know, where are the people's voices? Why are the people not demanding more cycle tracks? Why are we not witnessing demand for more pedestrianization? As you said, in New York, you know, the walkways. I mean, why can't we have those walkways right underneath the earth or maybe a little cover over the head? So I think overall it's very fascinating. And so, yeah, so 14% people decide for the 86%, not even that, even 1%. But yeah, that's how the policy, and we got rid of the RT. I mean, there were some problems, hiccups, but I think those hiccups could have easily. So overall, thank you so much, Pooja, and I think we can just jump to Dr. Survi to the questions.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful comments. Ma'am, I'll just read out the questions to you. The first question is by Kishorji, and the question is, how effective is India's disaster management authority? Are the policy designs which are in place are enough to manage disasters properly? What, in your opinion, the policy design should be?
Okay. Thank you, Survi. India's disaster management policy, if you look at the National Disaster Management Act 2005-15, and it's all on the website, and the National Disaster Management Plan, institutionally, it's one of the most comprehensive, well laid out institutionally, you know, with the right heads, right departments being involved in, etc., etc. You read the National Disaster Management Act, very well laid out. But in terms of practicability, in terms of implementation, it's then again state specific, sector specific. For example, in the case of Odisha cyclone, the tropical cyclone which the particular state experiences every year, it has been very well managed by the state of Odisha. You know, when it comes to landslides, when it comes to cloudburst in hilly regions, the state government of Himachal, the state government of Uttarakhand, they tend to have their own disaster management team, state disaster management team, which is very specific or reorients itself in providing relief and mitigation. So it's again sector wise, but disaster management, like I said, is incomplete without a strong community participation. So when it comes to community participation, we as people have to become more aware. We have to be more aware, or we have to have a sense of community engagement that in case there is an accident on the road or there is a calamity, we will not hesitate in providing relief, you know, instead of running away. That culture needs to be ingrained. So institutionally, we are very sound. State-wise, we have mastered and we are still working towards providing effective relief, but still there is a long way to go in terms of social engagement. There's a huge lacuna. So we need to build our capacity on that particular area.
Another question is by Ipshita ji. The question is, how easy or difficult it would be for policymakers to separate the value from the fact in designing environmentally sustainable schemes and policies? Shouldn't there be a kind of integration between value and fact in policy? For example, during Chipko movement, the aim was not just to achieve ecological sustenance, but also it stemmed from the fact that the resisting communities considered trees and forests as living that had to be protected from being destroyed. So there must be a conscious raising too.
Okay, very good question, Ikshita. See, when we talk about value and fact dichotomy, this is the most idealistic scenario. But achieving a full value fact dichotomy is nearly impossible. Why? Because as human beings, we can never be unbiased. You will always have a natural bias towards something. So put yourself in a position of, as an MP of your district, and think of your state and think that in your constituency, it's not that 100% people from your constituency supported your candidature. Maybe you won by, let's say, 51% or 74%. Having said that, you would like a re-election. You would want to come back to power again. And if coming back to power and a re-election are your set goals, then you're very flexible on values and facts. You become very flexible on attaching certain values to already established facts. Facts don't change. Facts nahi badalte. It's hot. There is a heat wave. Why? Because the temperature has exceeded a certain degree Celsius, and hence you are having a heat wave. There is an orange alert. Why? Because the rainfall has exceeded certain and there is a rainfall, and there is a possibility of a potential hazard turning into a disaster. So facts don't change. But if my goals are somewhere else other than development of my people, or an unshakable commitment to establishing a very sound disaster management infrastructure, then my value and fact will not change much. But if I want a re-election, then I will attribute any fact, any value I want to the existing fact. So for politicians, then again, a huge credit is given to Naveen Patnaik's government in Odisha, because of the way how he handled how he handles the tropical cyclone every year. But there is no undeniability that that particular action does not contribute to his re-election. We cannot forget that during the Hurricane Katrina, Obama administration which was basically dwindling in terms of popularity rating, suddenly found its rating to be higher, and Katrina basically secured a second term for Obama. So in that particular slide, when I discussed the strategic triangle, political supportability, organizational implementability, very complicated word, but know this, that all the three factors have to, coincide in order for a policy to even see the light of the day. If your politician does not feel that disaster management is important, aega disaster to dekh lenge kaun sa roz aata, etc. If they have that kind of narrative, then your disaster management effort in your state will suffer. But if as people you're very conscious, no, it is very important for me to have a strong disaster management approach in my district, in my area where I'm prone to flood, where I'm prone to drought, where I'm prone to heat wave, where I'm prone to tropical cyclones, where I'm prone to landslide. Pick your disaster. This is a subcontinent. But having said that, if it is very important for me to be safe from a disaster, then the machinery does reflect. So again, community engagement. As people, you have to voice your priority that environmental disaster management, environmental protection is a priority. It matters.
Surbi Palji is asking how to bring agendas like climate resilience policies into mainstream politics.
Thank you, Surabhi. Again, through dialogue, through engagements. Like I said, this is the first conference or a training program on heat wave, dedicated heat wave. I mean, it could have been on disaster management. It could have been on any broad topic. But when I shared the particular flyer for this event, my colleagues in the US outside, they were pretty impressed that, here is a think tank which is focusing or trying to create a dialogue or discussion around a very area specific disaster problem. So a natural disaster. Heat wave is a natural phenomenon, but it's occurring in those regions which are highly populated, have a high population density, larger migration, a large number of migrants, less access to public health care, which is leading to a higher casualty or a higher mortality. So that's why that particular natural phenomenon is turning into a disaster. How do you bring this into agenda? Write more, read more, bring this into a mainstream discussion. Your mainstream political agenda is basically a mainstream public discussion. So discuss this more openly, discuss this among forums, and then you will have a percolation or a transfusion of information from public to represent.
Ma'am, another question is by Prakash Ji, and the question is, what could we do to build capacity in terms of awareness about heat waves, and what can our education system do to equip masses right from our classrooms?
Again, making actively engaging curriculum, having earthquake drills or having disaster management drills repeatedly, so that these habits are ingrained into people's subconscious. So the example which I'm about to give is a very sad example, but now in US schools, because there have been mass shooting in US schools, the children are taught that if you hear this kind of a sound, or if you hear somebody saying get down or pointing a gun, you are supposed to lie flat on the floor and cover your head. This should not be a part of your engagement. Just ask any school kid, what will you do when if an earthquake strikes? We will go out of the classroom, but you will not run, you will walk. You will exit the building. These aspects are known to us. What if you're trapped in a building? You cannot move. You will find a corner where the walls join together, and you will seek shelter in that particular corner, or under a table or something. So these, how is this particular knowledge readily in my subconscious mind? Because I have been exposed to this particular knowledge or drill repeatedly over and over again. So how do you make citizen aware? By making sure that that information or that knowledge is always in the line of sight. So today, very simple, if I hum the lyrics of this very popular jingle, school chale hum. So, I can sing one paragraph and suddenly you will hear the jingle or the melody or the tune, because this is ingrained in your subconscious. So imagine if Doordarshan or any news channel or Netflix, they have these recurring, warnings, like during Corona period, and every time you used to call somebody, so there used to be a warning, mask pehen ke nikliye, duri banaye rakhe, and social distancing. So during the time of a disaster, or when a disaster might possibly strike, you have these warnings being issued. Stay hydrated, carry an ORS packet with you, and things like that. So this is the way you make sure that good disaster management practices are ingrained in the subconscious mind of your citizen. So they know exactly what to do, and they know exactly how to keep themselves safe and their loved ones safe. So making sure the information is in the line of sight. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, we come an end of the question and answer round. And I would like to thank Dr. Paswan once again for being with us and indulging such a lively discussion with the participants and imparting us a lot of knowledge on the policies related to heat waves. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
So that was the end of the last session for third day training program. Now I would like to invite our course moderator and convener, Shri Tikender Ji, to conclude the session with some words. So over to you.
Some connection issues, sorry.
Okay.
We can go ahead with vote of thanks
Vote
and
of thanks.
the announcement.
Okay.
Yes.
As we come to end of our immersive online training certificate program on understanding recurring heat waves, risk, impact, and the way forward for resilience, I, Sauravi Ghimire, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI and NIDM. This training course is organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and IMPRI, Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, or CECCSD, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute. We thank the patron for the program, Shri Taj Hassan, convener and moderator, Shri Tikender Singh Panwar, our conveners, Professor Dr. Anil K. Gupta, Dr. Simi Mehta, and Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay. We are very grateful to all our expert trainers, Shri Himanshu Shekhar Mishra, Dr. Naresh Kumar, Professor Joyshri Roy, Dr. Gulrez Shah Azhar, Shri Anup Kumar Srivastava, Dr. May Matthew, Dr. Manu Gupta, and Dr. Pooja Paswan. The certificates will be available after 2 working days from the NIDM portal event page after the submission of the feedback forms. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and who are actively involved in this 3-day training program. Thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts in understanding emerging issues concerning the impacts of policies in disaster management and helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course, which we believe might have led to a very fruitful outcome. I would like to thank the organizing team of IMPRI and NIDM for conducting the whole session in such a smooth manner. We thank all those who are watching us live on Facebook,